We all wish we could predict the future, right? Especially when it comes to money. But what if I told you there's something that makes the stock market look almost predictable? We're talking about the price of electricity. It is a super high-stakes guessing game with massive, real-world consequences. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on why it's so incredibly difficult and look at some of the new tools being built to bring some clarity to this crazy market.
I mean, think back to 2022. It really wasn't that long ago that the European energy crisis hit and prices just went through the roof. And that wasn't just some abstract headline. It had a huge impact on governments, on businesses, and, on all of us. It was a perfect and painful reminder of just how volatile and how important this market really is.
So what gives? Why is trying to predict the price of electricity, especially a year or two out, kind of like trying to solve a puzzle when half the pieces are missing? That is the big question we are going to unpack right now. All right, here's the game plan. We're going to start with the basic tools forecasters use. Then, we'll see exactly when and why those tools completely fall apart. After that, we'll dive into the 4 major hurdles that get in the way, a really clever new solution to overcome them, and finally, how this all shifts the game from just making predictions to building powerful what-if scenarios. Okay, so when you're trying to see into the future of energy prices, there are basically 2 different kinds of tools in the toolbox, and each one has its own set of strengths and, as you'll see, its own pretty critical weaknesses.
So on one side, you've got your data-driven models. Think of these as the sprinters. They are super fast, they're great for telling you what the price is probably going to be tomorrow, but the moment the market takes a weird turn, they tend to trip up. On the other side, you've got the marathon runners, the fundamental models. These things are beasts. They try to simulate the entire power market. They're built for the long haul, but they are slow, complex, and not so great for those day-to-day predictions. It's a classic trade-off, really, speed versus depth.
Now, the research we're looking at today really zooms in on those fast, data-driven models. They're awesome for what they're designed for, but the second you try to stretch them out to look far into the future, well, that's when things start to go very, very wrong.
And let's be super clear about this. If you need a forecast for tomorrow, these models are fantastic. They do their job, and they do it really well.
But what happens when you ask that very same model to look a little further, say 360 days into the future?
This is what happens. The model's internal logic just completely breaks down. Look at this graph. Each of these squiggly lines represents how important a factor is, like fuel costs or how much renewable energy is being generated. In the short term, on the left, they're pretty stable. But as you ask the model to look further out, it just becomes a chaotic mess. The lines go haywire, sometimes even suggest that higher fuel prices would lead to lower electricity prices, which, makes absolutely no economic sense whatsoever.
So why does this happen? Why do these otherwise useful models just fall off a cliff? Well, the researchers behind this study pinpointed 4 specific reasons, 4 major hurdles that cause them to break.
Okay, here are the 4 main culprits. The models are basically missing common sense economic rules. They don't have good long-term predictions for things like solar and wind power. They get totally confused by the weird, random behavior of commodity prices. And they have a hard time picking the right financial data to look at. Now that third one, that weirdness with commodity prices, is a really big deal, so let's dig into that for a second.
I know, unit root behavior sounds super technical, but stick with me. The idea is actually pretty simple. It's basically a random walk. Think of it like a person wandering around a city with no destination. Each step is random, and where they are now doesn't really tell you where they'll be 10 blocks from now. Any little shove or shock sends them on a whole new permanent path. Well, it turns out that fuel prices, like natural gas, act just like that, and that makes them an absolute nightmare for long-term forecasting models.
And this leads to a really dangerous statistical trap called a spurious regression. That's just a fancy way of saying the model finds a pattern that isn't really there. It's just a coincidence. The classic example is this. In the summer, ice cream sales go up, and unfortunately, so do shark attacks. A naive model might look at that and conclude that buying ice cream causes shark attacks. In the energy market, this is a huge problem. The model might wrongly connect a random blip in coal prices to a real change in electricity demand and just give you garbage results.
So to get around all these problems, the researchers came up with this really elegant 2-part solution for building a much smarter, more logical forecasting model.
First thing they did was simple but genius. They put economic guardrails on the model. They literally programmed in basic, common-sense logic. For instance, they told the model, hey, just so you know, higher fuel costs can never result in lower power prices, period. This one simple rule prevents the model from spitting out those totally nonsensical forecasts we saw earlier. Now the second part,
This is the real game changer. They call it the current model approach, and here's how it works. Instead of trying to connect today's gas price with the electricity price a year from now, they split the problem in two. First, they figure out the true real-time relationship between things like fuel and renewables and the power price, using data from the same day. Then, once they have that stable, solid relationship locked in, they apply that rule to future forecasts of where those drivers are headed. It's a brilliant move that separates finding the logic from the act of predicting.
Of course, for that second step to work, you need good ingredients, right? You can't just guess. The model needs its own solid, long-term forecasts for those key inputs. So what you're looking at here is the model creating a clean, seasonal forecast for things like renewable output and electricity demand. It's like it's learning to ignore all the daily noise and static so it can hear the real underlying rhythm of the market.
All right, so the million-dollar question. Does this new approach actually work any better? Let's check out the results and see what the real payoff is.
The numbers here really speak for themselves. This table shows the forecast error, and remember, a lower number is better. Now just look at that last column. For 360 days out, the standard model has an error score of almost 188. The new current model, it's down at 97. That is a massive improvement in accuracy, especially for the long-term forecasts where it matters most. It's not even close.
But the biggest win here isn't just about getting a single number right. Because this new model is built on stable, logical rules. Its true power is in scenario planning. It's less of a crystal ball and more of a sandbox, a way to play out different futures.
And this is why this is such a big deal. It lets companies and governments ask those really tough, critical questions. What happens if fuel prices spike like they did in 2022? How does that change a multi-billion-dollar investment decision? How much risk are we taking on with this new energy contract? Now, you can actually model these things and get a credible answer.
So, let's bring it all home. What we've seen is that the old ways of trying to predict long-term energy prices are, frankly, broken. But by building these smarter models that are actually grounded in economic reality, we're not just getting better predictions, we're getting a whole new way to prepare for an uncertain future. And that leaves us with a final thought. The question isn't really, can we predict the next energy crisis anymore? It's, are we ready to use these tools to successfully navigate